Looks like I'm just going right down the list here. Matthew Lloyd says, how do you think life began? Do you really think human consciousness could have started from a special mixture of inanimate substances with the magic ingredient of time? Or do you really think there's some kind of all-powerful entity we can't scientifically prove exists who created reality and life itself simply through thought? Or do you really believe door number 3? That's a really good question, Matthew. Dink. All right, here we go. I think there's extremely good physical evidence to say that life can evolve out of essentially the chemicals that the universe is constructed out of. There doesn't seem to be any unbreachable chasm between when Carl Sagan basically, I think it was Sagan, basically took the atmosphere of Jupiter, which is hydrogen, helium, methane, and ammonia, passed a spark through it as if through lightning. And when amino acids, basically brown amino acids, just kind of, slid down the side of the beaker, that is very, 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 very compelling evidence. Amino acids are the things that are the building blocks of life, at least in terms of carbon life, like we have here on Earth. I think they're the four different coded parts of our DNA, GTAC, I want to say. Cyanine, guanine, thiamine, and anyway, there's 4 of these things that you have to put together in DNA. One bonds with the other. They can't bond with others, and the sequence that these things bond in is what provides the genetic information that passes down, whether you're going to be an ant or an elephant. So there doesn't seem to be any particularly sharp cliff that separates any one step from the hydrogen and helium and methane ammonia in the universe to the pinnacle of human creation, which I think we can all agree is Michael Moore. So there's no walls between any of these steps. So, but this is why my answer is quite nuanced. If I say so myself. So. I'm told by Wild Goose that experiment was a hoax. In any event, we do see elements. We do see elements of the building blocks of life pretty much scattered throughout the universe. It's not like this is the only place where we find these things. So they're out there. There's a theory called panspermia. Is it something like that? Where basically they think that life is everywhere. It's on the surface of comets, and these complex molecules are basically exist pretty much everywhere. And when one of these things hits the Earth, then it grows here and grows there, grows everywhere. Life is everywhere. It's a possibility, I guess. But I'm just now finishing writing the thing on taxes, and one of the things I wrote about on taxes is how much money $3.5 trillion is, and there's a couple of really excellent videos showing how many $100 million cargo pallets it would take to make $1 trillion, and it's a lot of them, and we spend $3.5 trillion a year. So I mention that just to say that we have no idea of the extent of how long 3 billion years is. Probably 3 billion more or less. Earth's been around 4.6 billion years. So 3 billion years, we think, oh, well, that's quite a long time compared to what we're used to, but is that enough time? 3 billion years it's an unimaginably big amount of time. It's unimaginably large. So, yeah, I think the materials are there, and I think the time is there, and I don't see, as I said, anything that stops it. Now to the interesting part. Everything that we talk about when we talk about life being formed in the universe and given enough time, I think you said that was at the magic juice. That was a nice term. The magic ingredient of time. So yes, standing here in our three-dimensional universe, connecting to what we talked about earlier, you can look at this and say that this started in 3 billion years before this is, and these were little molecules, and then they turned into parameciums, and then they turned into little sea jellyfish or whatever the case may be. So there you go. We think, oh, we got from here to here, but that's assuming that time is linear, and I don't believe it is. I've come to believe, just based on some evidence, that time is a structure. It's a dimensional structure. It's if you were falling down a tube, like some kind of a grain chute or something, you're riding down a infinitely long water slide. you're inside this thing and it's moving, and all you see is the part of it that you're in. But if you look at it from the outside, you can see the whole water slide. So I think that the universe is built that way. And what that means is there is no before and after. If the universe is built the way I suspect it is, it's built all at the same time, and it was always there, and it will always be there. And so that raises the question of how did that 4-dimensional or 6-dimensional or 11-dimensional structure, how did that come into being? And this is why I like this question so much, Matthew, because questions like this run us right up against the limit of our monkey brains. It's the absolute great thing to realize that you get to the point where you realize, if you're intellectually honest and you're not one of these guys like Dawson or Sagan or the rest of it, if you're intellectually honest, you realize that there comes a point where no matter how smart any individual human is, he's going to be limited by the number of neurons. And even if he's got an incredibly nice little convoluted brain and all the rest of it, he's still going to be limited, still going to be limited by the simple number of neurons that we can use to process. In other words, I do believe that we're descended from how do I want to put this? From a proto-human ancestor, and we didn't come from apes. Apes and humans split off. The whole evolution tree, I think there's absolutely overwhelming evidence for. Overwhelming. But that's not the part that interests me. The part that interests me is if we think about this happened and then that happened, but what if that's an illusion? What if the whole thing is just a record? So let's just go here for a second. Imagine that the universe is an LP, it's an album, and we're the needle. And so as the needle stands there, and the needle actually doesn't move, but it feels like it's moving around the grooves, it vibrates and we hear the music. And you've got, let's say, 5 tracks on this LP. Well, if you say, well, which track came first, you could say, well, this track was recorded first, but it wouldn't be true to say that this track appeared first. The entire LP was stamped out at once. Boom, stamped out. And then if you ask somebody, well, what part of this song is more real than another one, that argument doesn't make any sense either. It's just patently narrow-minded to think. If you were to say to somebody, I think that, or if you were to talk to somebody who lived in the music in the needle, they would say to you, well, the only part of the song that's real is the part that's happening now, and there's another part of the song coming up in the future. I can remember the songs and the notes that happen behind me, says this person who lives in a phonograph needle. I can't see what's coming up in the needle in front of me, in the groove in front of me, but basically the only instant that counts is the now. Everything else disappears or has not appeared yet. And that's how a person living in the musical needle would look at things. But we all know that when you hold up an LP, there's no part of that record's more real than another part. You can go back to the first track of the first song again and again and again and again and again. You play it as many million times as you want to. And it's no more real than the fifth track. The fifth track is also real. You can jump back and forth. You put that needle wherever you want to on any one of those tracks, and you can hear whatever part of the album you want to hear. And that is a great way for me to get a handle on what I think essentially has happened with the universe. It is accessible, and that time as we understand it does not exist. Everything that happens, including free will, is built into this thing at the same, well, I want to say at the same time, but see, this is the monkey brain part. This is where we cannot go. We just can't go there. Mathematics, I'm sure, can go to some places. It's a language I don't speak, but even mathematics is a limit to things that we can understand. So we can't go there. So if this universe is like some giant, 4-dimensional, 6-dimensional, 11-dimensional construction, and we say it's always been there, the human part of our minds, which is all of it, but the limitations of our minds say, okay, yes, I understand that, but what was there before it got there? And you would say, well, nothing. Well, it's always been there. Yeah, I understand it's always been there, but surely something must have happened before it came. No, you cannot understand infinity. You can't do it. You can't understand eternity. They're just beyond our ability to do it. This idea that a new universe spins off every time a pigeon, poops on a car in a different location, spins off a whole new universe. Well, technically, every time quantum atoms interact, they would presumably break off into entire new parallel universes. There'd be hundreds of trillions of them created every single instant. And you think, my God, there's no way that could possibly happen. And then you realize you do not understand infinity. You do not understand infinity. How much, my God, how much space would it take to take an entire universe that we can see that's, trillions and trillions of light years across and from one end of the known universe to the other, and every single time something happens on anything, you're making a new copy? Where would you put it? And the answer is you'd put it in infinity, because it doesn't matter how big or how many there are. Infinity is infinity, and we cannot get there. We can get there as a model. We can say to ourselves, well, okay, I can kind of imagine it, but we can't. Same with time. You can't imagine the idea that something was there before this, or nothing was there before this. You can't understand how, if this universe is like a record, and it's all there, and it's all in one place at one time, and it's just punched out of something. You can't understand how free will could be baked into that, because you would think that one thing has to happen and then I do the other thing, but your free will is built into it. All the decisions that you made when I say made or will make, we're back again to time. We're talking about things that happened in the past or in the future, and we run up against it. We can't get past it, no matter how hard you try. Another great example of this is, and I'm getting to your answer because I basically think I've already made the case for a pretty good case for there's a material explanation for all this. You also can't get past infinity. So, for example, we now believe there's a Big Bang, explodes out, and all of the universe is inside it. And in fact, it's not just that that the galaxies are moving through space. Space itself is getting bigger. It's space-time, the emptiness of the vacuum is actually enlarging as this thing goes. So everything's moving away from everything else, in the same way that if you had a balloon and you put a bunch of little dots on it, and then you blew up the balloon, all the dots would move away from each other. And each one of the dots would think that everything else is moving away from it, but they're all moving away from each other. The universe is expanding. And then you hit the monkey brain again. Expanding into what? What do you mean? Expanding into what? If there's a boundary on the universe, it's the edge of the explosion. If this is as far as we can see, because that's when things began, that's where the universe expansion is, on the far side, what's on the other side of that? And we want to think that there's something like a celestial sphere. We can walk up to the edge of it, or fly in our Starship Enterprise, and fire some phasers at it, and get to the other side and look and see what's on the outside of the universe. No, there's nothing out there. This is the part where I just love it so much. You cannot get there. Cheryl just pointed out I've gone way longer than 5 minutes, but I think 5 minutes is the minimum. I know I did say the maximum, but I don't care. I'm having fun. So what's on the other side of the universe? Nothing. What do you mean, like a vacuum? No, I mean nothing. It doesn't exist. There's no existence on the other side of this thing that does exist. We can't handle it. We can't handle it. So to answer your question, Matthew, about a human consciousness and so on, I think that there's more and more information every day that's leading me to believe, based on quantum experiments, leading me to believe that the universe is not constructed out of matter and gravity and energy and all the rest. It's actually built out of information. That's a heck of a thought. And the reason I say this is because we know, experimentally proven thousands of times, probably every second, with all the quantum stuff that goes on and all our computing and so on, we know that if we observe something, we force reality to make a decision. Our monkey brains, and I don't want anybody to think I'm putting monkey brains down, because what we've been able to accomplish with this, cantaloupe-sized hunk of gray jelly is absolutely unbelievable. I'm speaking to you now through time and space. Some of you are seeing me 4 or 5 seconds after I say these words. Some of you are watching on YouTube. They see it maybe a year later or 10 years later, 100 years later, whatever. So I'm talking to you through time and space right here, and we can do this with our monkey brains, but we butt up against the ununderstandable when you get to this. And that's why mathematicians can kind of get there, because they're not having to visualize the reality of it. There's just a mathematical series of equations. So what I believe is that this universe is constructed from information. And I say that because the more we look at things, the more we change things. The finer we look at things, the finer things have to change. The act of observing things on a quantum level compresses the quantum probability. It's Schrodinger's cat, right? The cat is half alive, half dead. 50-50 chance of it being dead or alive. According to quantum, the cat is not either dead or alive, and we don't know. The cat is both dead and alive. It is both states at the same time. And then when we open the box, all of these quantum events compress down, and the universe makes a decision. If it's a random chance between 50-50, as long as nobody's watching, it stays unresolved. But when you observe it, you are forcing the universe to comply. Now, I know that sounds like a hell of a bizarre thing to say, but it's absolutely true. It's what happens on the quantum level, and since we're built out of these things, it's true on the major levels as well. So, while I believe that life can mechanically exist in this universe of ours, if you get past before and after, and if you come to the realization that that observation creates reality, then you are left with something really kind of interesting, and that is pretty much this. Dave Wellman points out it's not 50-50, it's 100-100. That's exactly right. 100% chance the cat's dead, 100% chance it's alive too. What? We won't know until we open it. That's nicely said. I really want to keep on to that. So if it's made out of information, if observation affects the structure of the universe, forces the universe to make a decision, then you get into what the great guy who's done the 10th Dimension videos had to say. He said, then you come up with the realization that life didn't evolve from the universe. The universe evolved from life. The consciousness was there, and the consciousness of observation created the world by making a decision by observation. We observe something, the quantum state decides, goes all the way, cascades all the way down. And so the more we observe, the more we create. And then if it turns out that our little monkey brains, God bless them all, are able to understand this and set up experiments to prove that it's true, and based cell phones and all the rest of it on this technology, if we can experimentally prove that this is true, and we can repeatedly prove that this is true, that if there are two particles that are separate, in fact, it's an incredible experiment. I'm surprised nobody's been talking about it more. There's something about it, it's called entanglement, where if you make a decision on one quark or one of these particles, the other one has to decide instantaneously to be the other thing. And instantaneously is not something that we have been able to deal with, because Einstein said that the fastest that anything can travel in the universe is the speed of light. That's as fast as the signal can go. But they actually did an experiment, and it was something to the effect of there were like two labs that were something like, I don't know, maybe they're 100 miles apart, kilometers apart. It was in Europe. And our ability to measure time now with atomic clocks is so unbelievably precise that basically what they did was they had a time cue, and they made this observation on this particle, and the entangled particle in the other lab changed, and it changed faster than the speed of light would have been to get from one town to another. In other words, they said it was at least 14 times faster, it may have been infinitely faster, but the signal, to their ability to measure it, the signal traveled faster from one lab to another than the speed of light. That is really something. So we observe something, and instantly, on the other side of on a different lab, other side of the room, other side of the universe, 100 trillion light years away, it instantly changes. Then you start thinking about the universe as being the result of observation. And we are able to make observations with our tiny little human brains, but it is entirely possible, may in fact be inevitable to the degree that we can understand such things, that something that has the information structure of this universe, the subtlety of it, I mean, this thing could have been an 8-bit universe, and we would have, flat galaxies and, 3 colors and all the rest of it. But no, the complexity of it, all the way down to the microscopic level and into the huge, huge universe, the complexity of it, if observation creates reality, that means that this universe had to be created by a being of such monumental consciousness that it was simply able to observe it into existence. And I suppose the best way you could put that would be to say it spoke it into existence. Speech is an idea. I have an idea, and I speak it. Most of the time I speak it before I have the idea, but most common people would say they get the idea and then they speak it. That's why I always get in trouble. So if you speak something, you think about something, you have to think about it before you can speak it. And when in the beginning of the Bible, God said, let there be light, and there was light, okay. Actually, somebody told me that the translation is much more subtle than that. That the actual translation is not "let there be light," but it is "let light be." Not "let there be light." Let light be. Let it become what it needs to be. So that's my answer. I happen to think that this entirely mechanical universe is constructed by the observations of a consciousness so far beyond our little abilities that you can call him whatever you want to. And then the question is, well, what about the afterlife and all that other stuff? And you think, well, why would being that powerful care about us and what happens to us? Why would he save us? Why would he save the pattern? And the answer is because he can. Because he can, because it can, because it's the kind thing to do. As they get more and more consciousness, as people become more and more aware, even in our little world, the more you think, generally speaking, and certainly the more experience you have with other people, the kinder you become. And so a creature of that monumental level of consciousness would be infinitely kind. And if it was capable of saving these patterns, and I don't see any reason why it wouldn't, since it created them in the first place, then why wouldn't it save them? Why wouldn't it take them to a happy place afterwards? Would you do it if you could? I mean, if you could, would you do it? If you could find a way to bring back a dog or a squirrel that gets run over, and you had the physical ability to take that squirrel into a laboratory, bring it back to some kind of life, and have the squirrel then think that it's in paradise forever, would you do it? I would do it. Why not? It's the kind thing to do. So there you go. That was a heck of a question, but I'm going to give that one to me. I think that's bing, 4-1.